And with that announcement, I'd like to welcome everyone once again to the Los Angeles Birders webinar for tonight. We are very pleased to have Diego Blanco here with us tonight. And to introduce Diego, I'd like to introduce Tori Fay.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. I'm thrilled to introduce today's speaker, Diego Blanco. Diego is a rising voice in California ornithology and an outreach and research assistant at the Moore Lab of Zoology at Occidental College. Diego blends field experience, curatorial work, and public engagement in a way that perfectly reflects the mission of the Moore Lab, using bird collections to understand the past, present, and future of avian diversity. Diego grew up in the San Gabriel Valley, where his early encounters with the screeching calls of roosting parrots first sparked his fascination with urban bird life. That childhood curiosity matured into a deep and active passion for birding, natural history, and science communication. After earning his BA from Cornell University in 2022, he returned to Los Angeles to join the Moore Lab team, where he now plays a key role in both research and public-facing programming. His fieldwork has included point count surveys for the Klamath Bird Observatory in Lassen Volcanic National Park and Whiskeytown National Recreation Area, documenting both birds and native plant communities. At the same time, he brings this expertise home to local audiences by leading events like Follow the Flock parrot walks and behind the scenes tours at the Moore Lab's phylogenetics collections, which we hope to arrange soon for the lab group. He also teaches birding and nature sketching workshops, which I have taken one and it was amazing, using both his scientific background and his talents in illustration to inspire broader appreciation of birds and biodiversity. Diego is a co-author on recent research exploring geographic variation in the elegant quail, and he's a key contributor to the Free Flying Los Angeles Parrot Project, using iNaturalist and community science to better understand our urban citizen neighbors. Today, Diego will share tips and tricks for identifying thrashers of the Southwest. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Diego.
All right, welcome, Diego.
Well, thank you,
And I'm going to
Tori,
go
for
ahead.
that introduction.
You're welcome.
I will go ahead and set up my slides here.
Sounds good.
All right, can everyone see this?
Yeah, it looks great.
Does everyone see a beautiful photo of Kelso Dunes by Sigfrido Zimmerman?
Yes.
Well, this is one of the haunts of one of the thrasher species we'll be talking about today, the LeConte's thrasher. Sigfrido is one of the faculty at Occidental, and he's a great nature photographer. So I had to use this photo as the background for the presentation today. But what we are going to be talking about is making sense out of the several thrasher species that we have here in the Los Angeles area and in Southern California as a whole. So let me see, okay. So thrashers are a specialized group. They are part of the mockingbird group, the Mimidae, the family that includes mockingbirds, thrashers, and a whole couple other groups of birds like tremblers, which I had not heard of prior to doing the research for this presentation. But they are dispersed all throughout North, Central, and South America. The true thrashers, the genus Toxostoma, are going to be the majority of what we focus on today, but we'll have one continuous detour into another genus that includes a bird that's called thrasher. And with that, there we go. We can get into our introduction here. So the thrashers that we are going to be talking about today are distributed all throughout the southwestern portion of North America. I will take you through a brief overview of all of the thrashers, the genus Toxostoma and the sage thrasher, which is not technically a thrasher if you're being a phylogenetic purist about it. But they all inhabit arid or semi-arid environments in the Southwest, and many of them are desert specialists. They are birds that are well adapted to take advantage of the resources that are available in environments like Kelso Dunes here. Um, so without further ado, why don't we move on to a little quiz, a pop quiz. Now, this might not work the same way that some of the other LA Birders webinars quizzes have worked. I don't have a poll here, but uh, I'm gonna leave this image up and wait about a minute or so, and then I'll flash the name of the bird on the screen. We will have another quiz at the end of the webinar, and hopefully, if you don't already get, full marks on the first quiz, you will improve your score by the end. Um, you write your answers down, you take that with you. It's an honor system. I can't, check through Zoom whether or not you got the answers right, but keep it in mind. And our first bird is this species right here, which a key hint towards its identification is the type of plant that it's standing on here. That is a cholla cactus, and this bird uh, has a strong preference for cactus, including the cholla, but also the prickly pear. And they even live in areas with saguaro cactus, clearly not in Los Angeles, but still in the American Southwest. So I'm going to take a beat here and let you guys think about this for a little while. Maybe Ron and Tori, you want to chime in when you don't tell me the answer, but maybe when you know the answer.
Well,
You guys
I,
probably know it
yeah,
straight off.
I kind of know it, but people can pop their who they think this or what they
Oh,
think this
yeah.
one is into the chat.
That's a great idea. I did forget about that meeting chat. So yes, put your guesses about what this bird is into the meeting chat. Oh, I just revealed it. It's the curve-billed thrasher. I was trying to click on the chat. All right, that one is a freebie. Mary Allen says the picture is too tiny. It looks pretty big on my screen, but I'm sorry if anybody has issues seeing the photos because that might not bode well for the other pictures we have, which are oftentimes smaller than this one. But let me know if you have issues seeing the photos. But yes, this is a curve-billed thrasher. Um, and we'll have a whole species account. We'll detail uh, the life history and the ecology of each of these thrashers that we're focusing on today, along with ID tips. But for now, let's move on to our next species. Okay, I'll let you guys sit with this one. It's pretty muted in color. It's got some faint streaking underneath. It's got a really bright yellow iris, and it's walking along the ground, as thrashers often do. You might want to take note of the length of that bill there. Certainly not the shortest bill that we'll be talking about today, but definitely not the longest either. So that might give you some clues as to the identity of this bird here. Okay, Surya's got a guess. Lily's got a guess.
Hmm.
All right. So think on it for a couple minutes more, a couple moments more, and I'm going to reveal it in just a second here. I'll do a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Both of our respondents got it right. Ben Deer's Thrasher, Ben Dyer's. I've always said Ben Deer's, but yes, this is Ben Deer's Thrasher. A desert dweller, an inhabitant of kind of open, dispersed scrublands and low desert washes along the southwest. So this is definitely a species that you would likely encounter around the margins of deserts or even in the flatlands themselves. Okay. Our next species here, uh, just like the curve-billed thrasher, if you don't already know this gentlemanly bird, you might take a look at the plant that it's standing on. It is a plant that is a common characteristic, or it's characteristic of the chaparral ecotype, the chaparral habitat. And this bird that we're looking at here is definitely a denizen of the chaparral. They prefer that habitat over almost any other, except on the coast. Um, okay, Mary's got a guess. Uh, so does Surya. So does George. So yes, I think everybody knows this is a California thrasher, our nearest and dearest of the genus Toxostoma, and typical of what are called the sickle-billed thrashers, which we'll find are actually a neat little monophyletic clade. Uh, this species and two others form a group that is characterized by that really long decurved bill that they use to rake through the leaf litter on the ground. Um, okay, we are going to move on. May we please have the photos full screen? The photos are full screen, but they are not full size on the slide, so I think that might be what's going on here. Um, my computer screen is maximized here at home. So, okay, let's write it out. And if we continue to have problems with the pictures, maybe we can recalibrate. But
Yeah, and if you can squeeze or and elongate with your touchpad or with your fingers, that will probably work on your computer as well. Oh, and finally, and Zoom does have a zoom in, zoom out option if you
let's
search
try
for it.
that. Let's try that.
Not for you, Diego, but for the viewer.
Oh, I see. Okay. It doesn't seem that I can zoom it in myself here, but um, I hope that doesn't pose problems for us because some of the pictures are pretty small that are going to be coming up here.
Okay,
Maybe I might try stopping the screen share and sharing it again. That might have something to do with it if you guys want to take a momentary break here.
sure, go ahead.
Stop the share. I'm going to check that everything is fine and dandy on my end with PowerPoint. Okay, we're going to share it again. I'm going to say play from current slide. Okay, is this any better?
It it's the same for me, actually.
Interesting. Well, I followed all the same protocols that I did with my previous webinars in sizing the pictures. Okay, yes, full screen on
Okay,
Zoom
yeah,
and it's
it's fine.
fine. All
It's
right.
good.
Okay, we fixed it. Perfect. Well, now you can see in high resolution this California thrasher. Um, the plant that it's standing on there is a sugar bush, Rus ovata, which is typical of the thick, waxy-leaved plants that make up the chaparral community. All right, let's move on. Okay, soliciting guesses for this guy. Uh, Probably the key feature, other than anything on the bird itself, is what it's standing on. Again, that's an idea that I want to drive home for a lot of these species is that they are tied to particular habitats. They have, their individual preferences about, what part of the habitat they use, how much time they spend on the ground, things like that, how much time they spend tucked away in dense thickets. Um, but this bird is standing on a very fine-grained sandy dune, it looks like. And that is a good hint about what this species is. So yes, looks like everybody's got it. This is the, oops, unmistakable Lacan's thrasher. Um, a good deal paler than the other thrashers that we've got today, but another member of that sickle-billed thrasher group, the little subset of Toxostoma that we'll be talking about once we see the whole phylogeny. Okay, so this guy uh, looks a little bit like the California thrasher that we saw, but there are some key differences. You might take a glance at the color of its iris or the extent of the dark markings around its chin underneath the malar region, um, and also at the vegetation type. Again, this is definitely a leguminous tree of some kind, maybe a mesquite or it's not an ironwood, or maybe a cat's claw acacia, which is not really an acacia, it's a Senegalia. But yes, everyone is hitting the nail on the head here. This is a chrysal thrasher. Um, in researching for this presentation, I was curious as to what the word chrysal means because I've seen that the Latin name of California towhee is also Melazone chrysalis. So I was wondering what this whole crystal business is about, and I will explain it to you once we get to the species. I thought that it referred to the plant community that it lived in. It had kind of I don't know, a deserty feel to the word, but that's not what it was at all. So. Pay attention to the color underneath the tail. That's relevant. Okay, and finally, the last bird in our little introductory quiz here, quite different from the other ones, almost suspiciously different. You might think this bird doesn't look like a thrasher at all. This bird looks a lot more like a mockingbird. It does not have a long decurved beak. It's got sort of more normal looking mockingbird proportions in its legs, not so much of a long tail as the other thrashers that we've seen. Um, And yes, we've got a lot of responses. So this is the sage thrasher in name only, because as we'll see in this phylogeny here, the sage thrasher is way over here. It's the earliest branch off of the rest of the thrashers. Now, I always like to situate um, any topic about birds in the phylogenetic context because it gives us a really good and cohesive framework for understanding why birds look similar to each other and why they look different, and contextualizing when and why they look similar or different. So I have simplified this cladogram from a paper that was came out from Cornell by Irby Lovett and a bunch of other authors in 2012 that did a whole phylogeny of the Mimidae, the mockingbird and thrasher family. And what you are not seeing on this phylogeny is the whole clade that includes all the mockingbirds, the Bahama mockingbird, the northern mockingbird, all the other tropical mockingbird, all those mockingbirds are the sister group to the genus Toxostoma or the true thrashers. And the sage thrasher, as you will notice if you look at its Latin name here, Oreoscoptes montanus, that is not Toxostoma anything. That is not in the genus Toxostoma. So if we are going to be calling the rest of the thrashers uh, in the genus Toxostoma thrashers, then it might seem that it doesn't make sense to extend that name to the sage thrasher. But because convention has dictated that this guy is named sage thrasher, I've included him in this presentation today. Although technically, genetically, he is a mockingbird, one of the earliest branches off the mockingbird side of the family, rather than a true thrasher. And you'll see all sorts of telltale signs that the sage thrasher is not like the others as we go through the rest. Now, you're probably looking at some of these other species on the phylogeny and thinking, well, I've never seen an ocellated thrasher anywhere in LA. And if you have, then kudos because they are a Mexican bird, and so are a couple of the other species here. The Cozumel thrasher is endemic to the island of Cozumel off the Yucatan Peninsula. And I've just portrayed them all here so that you can get a sense of the entire variation that you have within the genus Toxostoma. Um, Alongside some of the ones that you don't find in Los Angeles, you have the familiar ones. So we've got Crystal Thrasher, LeConte's Thrasher, California, Bendier's, and Curve-billed Thrasher, which is on range maps, you'll often see the curve-billed thrasher kind of cut off right at the Colorado River, uh, conveniently at the border of California. So it doesn't, the ranges often don't portray it spilling into California at all. But if you look at eBird records and if you look at iNaturalist records, you'll see that they are found in California from time to time. So I've included the curve-billed thrasher in the species accounts that we'll be going through today also. But within the genus Toxostoma, there are two main lineages. And the first one is the group that includes birds that look a lot like the brown thrasher, the long-billed thrasher, the Cozumel thrasher. They look pretty similar to the brown thrasher. And I know occasionally brown thrashers end up in California and even in Los Angeles. But I think that they're so unmistakable that I really don't need to cover them in this webinar because anybody can look at a brown thrasher and say that, all right, it looks nothing like any of the other birds that we have here. So, the options are pretty limited. So we've skipped brown thrasher in our species accounts today. But also within the lineage that includes the brown thrasher and its closest relatives are the ocellated thrasher and the curve-billed thrasher. So despite looking like some of the other thrashers on the California thrasher side of the family, the curve-billed thrasher is more closely related to the brown thrasher than it is to, say, the Bendier's or gray thrasher, which it looks a lot more like. Um, the gray thrasher is found in Baja California, so again, not an Alta California bird, but still relevant for our purposes here because it's in the family too. And then you've got the bendeer as its sister species, and then this group is what I was referring to as the sickle-billed thrashers, the chrysal, the LeConte's, and the California thrasher. And you'll see that the LeConte's and the chrysal are each other's closest relatives. So looks can be deceiving. This is why I like to point out the phylogeny because I'm gonna, in just a second, offer you a different way of looking at these birds that's based just on similarity of morphology. Um, but before we get to that point, I think it's best to start with the true evolutionary relationships, the true natural categories that are found in here that are not, arbitrary in the way that comparing things just by appearance alone would be. So despite looking like the most like each other, the crystal thrasher and the California thrasher are not each other's closest relatives. The LeConte is kind of wedged right in there, and as we go through the species accounts, you can think of the LeConte as like a pale crystal thrasher. Um, so let's move on to our next framework for understanding the diversity that we have in thrashers. Now, this is a key that I've created to aid you in identifying any given thrasher that you're looking at. Now, just a bit of a disclaimer, this is only covering adult birds. Some of these species that don't have any markings, like the LeConte, the California, and the Chrysal, when they are young, they might have a little bit of streaking or spotting on the underparts, but for purposes of simplification, I've just taken the adult plumages of these birds and sorted them into different categories. So the orientation of this chart is up and down rather than left to right like the previous phylogeny was. That's because, again, this is not a phylogeny at all. This is essentially a flow chart. You start, can you see my cursor if I point to things on the screen? Maybe someone in the chat wants to let me know. If I'm
Yeah,
gesturing to something
yeah,
on, okay,
yes. Right now
good,
you're gesturing to something on
to
top.
the very top. All right. So this little white line up here represents you with your binoculars seeing a thrasher out, in Mojave National Preserve or at Griffith Park or, wherever it is that you're seeing a thrasher. You're faced with a choice about the identification of the species. Is it a thrasher that has a really rich orange rufous back, or does it have kind of a pale gray or a brown back? Now, if you're looking at a bird with a totally rufous orangish back and really strong spotting on the underparts, you are looking at one of these three species, either the brown, well, probably not the Cozumel thrasher if you're, not on the island of Cozumel, but the long-billed thrasher also falls into that group. Um, so within that, the brown thrasher is set apart from the others by its short and straight bill. And the other two have this slightly decurved bill. It's not nothing like the, sickle bill of the other thrashers, but it is decurved to a stronger degree than the brown thrashers is. So now you're here at this point in the decision tree. You either have a bird with dark slatey gray auricular feathers on the cheeks, or you have one with sort of pale beige auriculars. And that's the difference between those two species there. Um, so now, okay, what if your bird does not look like any of the three on the left here? If it has a pale gray or a brown back, chances are it's one of these on the right-hand side of the graph here. So the first easiest distinction to make is whether or not the bird has any streaking or marking or patterning on its undersides whatsoever. Aside from just the facial pattern, which I'm leaving out, it's just the body and the faint, white edging to the coverts on the wings that's like the California has. If you are looking at a thrasher that does not have spotting or streaking of any kind, you can be fairly certain that it is either LeConte, California, or Chrysal. And right away, you can rule out the LeConte because it's this uniform sandy pale color. It's much lighter in color than the other ones. So that's the first branch off that tree there. If you have a bird with a brown body and some striping on the facial pattern, you've got one of these two species. And these are sort of random field marks that I've chosen to use to distinguish the species. You could just as easily point to the colors underneath the tail to separate the Chrysal from the California thrasher, but those can be a little bit, variable in terms of the lighting that you're looking at, how good of an angle you've got on the bird. But something that is always, pretty easy to tell apart between these two species is the color of the iris. If it's got a dark iris, chances are it's a California thrasher. And if it's got a light kind of orangish colored iris, that's a Chrysal thrasher. You can also separate these species by range to a good degree, and we'll talk about that with each of the individual species accounts. But again, this is just morphology. Now, okay, let's say your bird did have some kind of streaking or spotting on its body. Uh, Again, ignoring range, you'd have to be in Mexico for this to be true. But if the bird that you're looking at is really, dark in color and it is uh, got some really heavy dark spotting on the undersides, that's the ocellated thrasher, named for those ocelli, those spots that are on the underside. The rest of them are going to be pale brown or gray and have some degree of streaking on their undersides. So rather than trying to tease apart the extent of the streaking or anything like that, I found it most helpful to at first look at the beak. So if it's got kind of a relatively shorter and more weakly decurved bill, you are on this path of the flowchart. And if the bird that you're looking at has pretty low contrast streaks, and this is true of this pair over here too. But if it's got low contrast streaks, it's more likely to be a Bendier's thrasher. And if the streaks are really high contrast and they stand out from the white that's on the underside a lot more, then that is pointing you towards the sage thrasher. Again, thrasher, not really thrasher. Uh, we'll see so many other characteristics of this bird that are just dead ringers for mockingbird. The sound, the wing displays, all sorts of stuff. So this guy has weaseled his way in here, and I'm sure I'll mention that a lot more. But um, the other thing for the sage thrasher, again, is that short mockingbird-like beak rather than the long decurved beak. Okay, so if the bird that you're looking at that is streaked or spotted to some degree does have a long decurved bill, then you are choosing between one of these two species, either the gray thrasher, which is in Baja, that has relatively higher contrast streaking on the bottom, or the curve-billed thrasher, which is probably more relevant to us here in LA, that has, again, relatively lower contrast streaking on the underside. Okay, we will revisit this key, but I wanted to put it up here just so that we have a starting point and we see the two different ways that you can categorize these birds. You can categorize them either with the phylogeny or with the morphology and the outward appearance. And one of those two different classification systems are going to give you different groupings, but it's all about what's most useful to you in the moment. If you are just trying to identify and put a name to a species, chances are it'll be a lot more helpful to use a key like this than it will to be looking at a phylogeny. But, say you're designing a study or you're wanting to understand patterns of biogeography and how these thrashers came to diverge from one another in an evolutionary context, then the phylogeny is what you want. All right. So that brings us to our first feature species in our species account section, which is what we're going to be going through for the rest of the talk, pretty much. The curve-billed thrasher, Toxostoma curvirostre, is distributed over here on the left. You see the map of its overall distribution, and there's where I said that neat little cutoff right next to the Colorado River going down there. It is mostly found all over the mountains and deserts of Mexico, and then also into southern Texas, like the Rio Grande Valley, and over here into the rest of the Southwest, Arizona and New Mexico. And that is reflected in the habitat preference that these birds have. So I've started each one of these species accounts off with a look at the habitats that they occupy. Now, this is not meant to be an exhaustive treatment of every single slightly nuanced variable plant community that they inhabit, but for the most part, you can divvy it up into large blocks of different kinds of habitats that offer different opportunities for using them to obtain the things that they need to survive. Um, the primary habitat for the curve-billed thrasher is thorn scrub. So, things like mesquite or yucca, like it says up here. Um, Thorn scrub is, the name is a pretty good indicator of what the habitat is like. It's the kind of habitat that you'll find in southern Texas and through, the drier areas of Mexico that's got big shrubs. They often have spines to deter herbivores, and this is creating a unique structural element that the thrashers are taking advantage of. Um, every species of thrasher that we're going to be talking about today likes to be hidden in dense thickets, so that's a common theme. Um, I will say about the thrashers as a group overall that they are a lot more forgiving to the uh, would-be ID webinar presenter because they can, they have clear contrasting markings. They live in, set areas that don't always overlap. And so it's a pretty easy toolkit that I'll be equipping you guys with today to start telling these birds apart. Um, but the curve-billed thrasher is not just restricted to thorn scrub. Um, Essentially, what they're going to be tied to the most is the presence of those spiny plants, especially cactus. And there's, a couple different groups of cactus that they like. The Cholla cylindropuntia, which is the genus name, is a favorite. They nest in cylindropuntia. So is the prickly pear, and the one on the right here, this picture on the right, is a curve-billed thrasher sitting way at the very top of a saguaro cactus. So thorn scrub, grassland, and sort of thickets of mesquite and other plants that are along washes and arroyos and deserts um, are all potential areas that you could find curve-billed thrashers. But what's really going to make the difference is the presence of those big spiny plants that they like to nest in to protect their nests from would-be predators. They're also found in pinyon oak woodland at higher elevations. Uh, they're also found in creosote areas. Creosote is a really interesting plant. I will not digress because if I start talking about creosote, it'll be, another 40 minutes. But there are really extensive patches of creosote bush, especially in the Mojave Desert. So you'll find them in the creosote too. And then in Arizona, they do associate with the saguaro and palo verde communities. Palo verde is a great big legume tree that has green branches and trunk, which gives it its name. Palo verde means green branch in Spanish, that they use to photosynthesize without losing too much water. So there's the overall picture of where you can find curve-billed thrashers. Again, lots of nuance, lots of specifics that I didn't cover. But now let's talk a little bit more about the birds themselves. So right off the bat, some field marks that you can use to identify curve-billed thrashers include the faint streaking on the underparts, that long decurved bill, not as long as some others, but longer than, say, the sage thrasher. It's got pale brown upper parts and a light colored iris. Sometimes they can be almost dusky in appearance. They can be, pretty dark looking, but it's still kind of a solid gray, and it's not, anything like the brown thrasher. So that bird in the top there is exemplifying that lighter brown coloring. But then look at this one in the Cholla here. He's a lot darker. So it's variable, brown to gray. But now onto their movement patterns. They, like almost all other species in this genus, all the other thrashers, including these guys, are pretty much sedentary for the most part. Again, they're specialists. They're desert specialists. They're arid land specialists. And so, for the most part, they have what they need in a given environment and they kind of stay there and just do their thing. But there is in this species some limited evidence, older studies that I think have been, brought into question, but uh, overall, a little bit of evidence for local migrations. They might move around, certain subpopulations might move around here and there. Another thing that I did not include in this presentation are the subspecies delineations within all these species. I actually don't know how many of them are monotypic and how many of them have different subspecies, but I know a lot of them do have subspecies. I'm intending this to be, the first, foray into identifying thrashers. So, if you want to look at the subspecies delineations, Birds of the World is your best bet, which, by the way, is where I got most of this information. Um, I did not just pull it out of the ether. They breed from February to August, and I'll show you a little chart of their phenology. Phenology just refers to the different time of year that living things do certain behaviors or go through certain parts of their life cycle. So uh, the breeding period, I think, is the most interesting, one of the most interesting pieces about that life history. So I've included it in the species accounts. But they breed from February to August, and they build these cup-shaped nests inside of the dense, spiny tangles of choyas and prickly pears, and occasionally other spiny shrubs too. Like the other thrashers, they often have light blue or kind of greenish eggs. They don't all have that, and I didn't get pictures of eggs for all of them, but you do often see bluish eggs in the thrashers. Um, they a little fun tidbit that I found was that they will occasionally build their nests on top of old cactus wren nests. So, it just goes to show that they've got, the same preference for the same plants. Both of those species are keying into the fact that if you're laying your eggs in the middle of a bunch of spiny cactus branches, fewer predators than otherwise would be are going to come and try and eat your eggs. Um, but as for their diet and the way they obtain the components of their diet, I think this is a really important piece of information, obviously, for any bird, because obtaining food and feeding is how they participate in the rest of the ecosystem around them. So this is what ties them into the other species that they share, their landscape with. Um, in this case, they're eating those other species, things like little arthropods, insects, or there's one species of actually I think it's the curve-billed thrasher, and the account on Birds of the World that said it ate crustaceans. I didn't quite know what that meant. Maybe they're like getting a I don't know, an isopod or a crayfish now and then, but I couldn't picture that, so I didn't include it. But um, like many of the other thrashers, they get their food by using that long decurved bill to rake through the leaf litter that's underneath these desert shrubs, kind of pockmarked along the landscape, and they'll turn up whatever they can find. Beetles, snails, other arthropods, and they do also eat little berries too, because if you're a small bird, who wouldn't want to eat berries? Um, but there is an important distinction in the beak morphology of thrashers that I want to point out at this point. Um, the thrashers, there have been some studies that have looked at the biomechanics of thrasher skulls and the musculature around their beaks and faces. And there's a distinction between the ones that have shorter bills that have less of a curve to them and the ones that have longer bills. The ones with shorter bills, shorter, straighter bills, they are primarily pecking. They're sticking that beak against the ground, and they actually have reinforced musculature at the base of their beak that helps cushion that impact. So they will be, jamming their beak against the hard, sandy, rocky ground and getting their food that way. But the ones with longer beaks tend to either use them to actually excavate, so dig out from the leaf litter, but also to, like a scythe, go through and rake that leaf litter up. Unlike other ground foraging birds like towhees, for example, they don't really use their feet to scratch around in the leaf litter. They use their beaks for that. So there's a look at how the curve-billed thrasher makes its living in the desert environments that you can find it in. Okay, now here we're gonna have to do a little hop, skip, and a jump over to another window on my computer because I want to play you guys the sound of the curve-billed thrasher. I'm going to do this at the end of each of the species accounts, or the second to last thing of each of the species accounts, because I could not figure out how to embed the sound in the PowerPoint itself. But no worries. Um, some little notes. These are not exhaustive descriptions. Again, they're just my notes about what I think the songs sound like. They have kind of, like many of the thrashers, they have a rollicking sound to their song. They will, repeat certain phrases and kind of do it in a tumbling manner. I think the more you tune your ears to these different songs that we'll be hearing today, the more you can start to peel apart the differences in cadence, in rhythm, and the speed with which they deliver those phrases. But let me play that sound for you. So I'm going to stop the share here, and I'm going to start a different share with the Macaulay library on it. So where are we now? We are on curve-billed thrasher. Okay. Let's play. This one I think has a bunch of background noise, but here we go. This is our sonogram. If you cannot hear this, say so in the chat.
Yeah, it's coming through my computer fine.
Okay, so it sounds a lot like a California Thrasher, which I think is the best anchor point because it's the one we're most familiar with. Um, if you put me in a room with two speakers playing this out of context, I would have a hard time picking apart which one is the her build and which one is the California. But as lots of field guides and other resources say about the California Thrasher, it tends to double up its phrases and it has kind of more of a harsher staccato, pace to the song. I'll be quiet so you can continue listening. Some of the Thrashers have a more metallic, kind of raspier sound to their song, but this is a nice and pretty musical one. I'm not hearing too much mimicry going on in this particular recording. I know there are some that did have notes in the literature about mimicking to a lesser degree than some of the other ones, like the California Thrasher, but I think that might be true of this one too. Okay. Beautiful song. And now let's get back to our PowerPoint. Okay, now that I'm sharing this here, did the picture change for anybody? Is it suddenly really small and hard to see?
No, it looks the
Okay,
same.
perfect. So the call, which I could have also played when I was on that window, but I didn't. So I'll just whistle it for you. It's two double whistled notes that are rising in pitch at the end. You know what? I'm gonna do my due diligence and go back to the Macaulay library so that you can hear that. Okay. The majority of the recordings on here are of that call note. So let's play one of these. Totally unlike the call note of the California Thrasher, which is more of like a kind of sound. So the call is distinctive in this species. It's a lot different from the California, despite the song being similar. Okay. So the last thing that I've included in each of the species accounts is a look at, on the left side, the annual cycle of the birds. So that concept of phenology that I was talking about. This comes straight from the Birds of the World species account for this species. And it's this like calendar circle. Each of these is like January, February, March, April, May, so on, all the months. And then the legend over here tells you what you're seeing. So the pale bar with the black lines, this innermost circle here, this is telling you when the birds are molting. So the primaries are the innermost circle and the body feathers are the outermost in that ring. So they start molting their primaries in June and they wrap it up in October. And they start molting their body feathers the beginning of July, wrap it up by early October too. And same thing for the breeding. You can see that they start in February laying their eggs and they will have young all the way into the end of August. Um, like any data set for natural history observations, these are general trends. I'm sure in the history of North America, there's been a curve-billed thrasher that had young in September, but for purposes of general understanding, this is what we get. Now, on the right here is a map from iNaturalist, which perhaps a bit of a taboo. I sometimes prefer their mapping layout to eBirds. I'm sure there's a great and scientifically sound reason for those giant purple blocks that obscure what you're looking at underneath it, but the iNaturalist maps tend to be a little bit more granular and you can see the names of the places underneath. So I have taken a subset of the range of the curve-billed thrasher and shown it to you here so that you can see where in our local relevant area you might encounter these birds. So their stronghold is definitely over here in Arizona, and then over here they're scattered into the Mojave Desert, and occasionally they go, this far west. But you'll be seeing those for each one of the different species that we go through today. All right, next bird, Bendir's thrasher. Toxostoma bendiri. Um, so again, starting with the habitat and the range, this is one of the few thrasher species that, or maybe the only one, that does make a significant movement from breeding grounds to non-breeding grounds. There is a resident section of the population. It's what you're seeing on the bottom here, this purple blob. These are the birds that are there year round, but then this other subset of the population goes farther north, and when they're done breeding, they will go into the southern portion of their range. That probably has to do with seasonality. It's probably, it might not be hospitable for them at that time of year, so they book it and they get out of there. But they're found again, look at that little piece of California there. That's the Mojave Desert. That purple bit is like the Sonoran or Colorado Desert there too. And the habitats that you'll find in both of those deserts are desert grassland, shrubland, or woodlands with scattered shrubs and trees. Now, I recently learned the difference between a woodland and a forest, and it has to do with whether or not the canopy touches. So if you've got a bunch of trees that are all leaf to leaf with each other, that's a forest. But say you're on overlooking a bunch of rolling hills and you've got an oak over here and a pinyon over here and a juniper over there and they're not touching, that's a woodland. So they occupy open areas that have the shrubs, which is really what they're after. They are not primarily arboreal birds. They are, scratching around in leaf litter, and the leaf litter has to fall from those shrubs. So typically you'll find them underneath shrubs like that. But you will also find them in riparian woodland and washes in the desert. If you've ever seen an alluvial fan is, a deposition of sediment that washes out of a canyon and it forms a fan shape as it goes out of the mouth of the canyon. That creates unique soil environments that lots of different kinds of plants like to grow in, and so it makes these little microhabitats that the birds specialize in, or pass over entirely. But as far as plant associations, again, it's typical of the desert communities. It's like cholla, Joshua tree, yucca of a couple species, palo verde, the mesquites, and all these other, shrubby, spiny, prickly, tumbleweed-looking desert shrubs. Um, an interesting fact that I learned about these is that they tend to avoid cholla stands wherever they come, where they share a range with the curve-billed thrasher. So these guys are kind of more of generalists than the curve-billed thrashers. So, it must be that the curve-billed thrashers are so tied to those chollas that they, when they do come into contact with, this species, they won't give them up. They are like, these are our chollas. We're making our nest here. You guys, you can handle the random desert wash environment. You go do that. But again, just a little piece of interesting trivia. Okay, now identification for these guys. They again are part of that group that have weak, faint streaking on the bottom. They are uniform, kind of dusty brown. They have a short bill with a weak curve to it. And they've got like a pale throat and a little bit of that mailer stripe there too. So it's faint, but it's still there. You can kind of see right there. Um, but again, they have that bright yellow iris too. Um, these guys, like I mentioned, are short distance migrants and they breed from January to August. The nests pretty much all look the same to me. These nest photos came from they came from the Birds of the World website, but they were photographed at the Western Foundation, where they've got all those, an aircraft hangar full of nests and eggs. So the Thrasher nests tend to look pretty similar. They're all kind of cup shaped. So you'll see I wrote cup shaped on each one of these species accounts, even though it's the same for each one. But as for their foraging, they, mostly pretty typically spend their time on the ground, but they will take insects off of vegetation. They'll be leaf gleaners too. And again, this is that distinction between the short beaks and the long beaks that I was saying earlier. They spend more of their time bang, 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 pecking against the ground than like sifting, excuse me, or digging or raking with those long decurved beaks. Um, a lot of these thrashers are not too picky with the insects that they eat. You'll see in some of the diet sections that I highlight a couple, species. That's just for your own edification. You can kind of imagine that they're gonna eat anything that's crawling around on six legs or more that they can get their beak around. Okay. All right. So for the song, this one I think is pretty unique among the Thrasher sounds, and it's not the hardest one to distinguish. You'll see when I play the sound that it has kind of like a slurred quality to it. Like the phrases blend into one another as they go along, and they're not so sharply separated as they are in the songs of some of the other ones. You can wax poetic about it. You can say that some of them are, more graceful with the way that they transition from one phrase to another. But I think that's a little bit subjective. But these guys for sure have a different sound. It's much raspier and buzzier than the other thrashers. I've heard the word bury to describe bird songs, but I don't entirely know what that means, so I'm going to leave that out. But their calls are again just sort of more of a simple single or a double note. Um, Unlike the California thrasher, like the curve-billed thrasher, just in terms of number of syllables. Let me go ahead and play this Ben Deer's Thrasher song so that you can see what I'm talking about, or hear what I'm talking about. Okay, let's pick this one. This one I don't think is the best example of it. Let's try another one. Let's try this one. Okay, much better. So you hear how it's kind of like a run-on sentence? They're going like rather than like that, like maybe the California Thrasher. Um, I'll try and play one more of these. That one's a little faint. Let's try it. This looks like a good one. Yes. They barely take a breath between those phrases, and it's raspier than the other ones. Sounds a little bit more metallic, to my ears at least. The phrases are blended together. They go from one to the other without much of a pause between them. Okay. And the call notes, let's see if they have them over here. I think that's a killdeer in the background. Okay. But hopefully you could get a sense of what I'm talking about when it comes to that quality of the song that's kind of um, a little bit more breathless than the other thrashers. And I'm happy to come back to these sounds because I wasn't quite sure at the beginning how I would portray the sounds just with the logistics of this, but we can come back to it. Um, but again, hopefully you got a sense of that distinction in their sound. Okay. Now, again, I'm not going to elaborate that whole pie chart on the left, but you can see again, it's demarking similar things. Um, and on the right, again, is that local distribution. So there's been some reports of them in Palm Springs, but for the most part, they're on the other side of the San Gabriel Mountains in the desert environments. Okay. Big and famous California thrasher. This species, I'm sure, needs no introduction. If you take a look at the range on the top right there, they are almost only in California, but they do make it into Baja too. These guys are the familiar thrashers of the chaparral here. One of the most beautiful voices that I've heard a bird have. And they are again kind of stand out among the thrashers because they're so closely tied to the chaparral habitat, which is not desert vegetation. It's not anything like the creosote areas or the thorn scrub or the dune environments or the really truly arid habitats. The chaparral is part of the Mediterranean climate regime. So it gets dumped on, well, historically, it could count on being dumped on by rain in the winter, and then during the summer, it goes dry. So the plants have adaptations to retain water and, divvy out their water and light needs throughout the year. And it makes them, yeah, have a unique shared morphology among different unrelated groups. Oftentimes, they are very thick-leaved. They have waxy coatings to the leaves. That helps retain the water to a certain degree, and they can get to much larger sizes than some of the desert plants because they have more water available to them throughout the year. So it's in this kind of habitat that the California thrasher makes its living. But occasionally they will also range into other habitats, closer to the coast. They'll dip into the sage scrub, which is more like sagebrush scrub, California sagebrush, which is not technically a sage. It's in a totally different family, but it's called sage scrub. And that's much more of a low slung plant community. They will also go into pine woodland that has, as long as it has large shrubs in the understory. Same thing with pinyon juniper areas that have bushes and understory, and they will also hang out in saltbush thickets. Now, saltbush is a plant that is it's a genus of plants that's distributed all over the West, and they're tolerant of saline conditions, hence the name saltbush. They excrete the salt onto their leaves. You can lick them and it's salty. And they're really dense and they provide good cover for birds like the California thrasher. All right. So they are most likely to be confused with the chrysal thrasher. Beyond just that dark iris that I mentioned at the beginning, I think looking at the malar region, so the facial pattern too is a good way to tell them apart. They have a dark border to their white malar stripe, but it's usually more strongly contrasting above the white malar stripe than it is below. They have kind of just a broad white throat, and the chrysal thrasher, as you'll see, has the dark outline of the malar stripe underneath the stripe. So it looks like it has um, a really contrasting black stripe underneath there that is not always so demarcated on the California thrasher. Um, Again, it does not have any streaking as an adult. It doesn't have any, spotting or patterning on the undersides. And here is where I'll talk about the chrysum. So the chrysal thrasher, along with the California towhee, there's another warbler that's got chrysalis in its name. But the chrysum is basically a fancy term for the undertail coverts. And all of the birds that have chrysal in their name have some patch of color that is distinctive, that's localized to the undertail coverts. So think about a California towhee. It's got that same rusty red underneath the tail as the California thrasher does, and the chrysal thrasher too. Now, that's another point of identification that you can use to split those two species apart is that the chrysal thrasher has on average, a much more rich, like a more saturated color to those undertail coverts. And the California thrasher, it definitely still does have that reddish coloring underneath the tail, but on average, it's more muted than the, yes, Colima warbler. Well, sorry, I'm going to take your word for it, but I do remember it was a warbler. Um, I think it has a yellow color underneath its tail. So yes, fact check me on that, but I'm pretty sure Colima warbler is right. Another bird that has a chrysum that features in its Latin name. But to my point, the California thrasher's chrysum is rusty brick colored, but it's also fainter compared to the rest of the colors of the bird than that of the chrysal thrasher. Um, Onto the movement and the phenology, they are sedentary. They do not migrate. They, might switch a territory here and there, but they are not going to be undertaking seasonal movements tied to resource availability. And they breed from January to July. Their nest, like the other thrashers, is cup-shaped, and you might get tired of hearing me say this, but they place it in the middle of a dense shrub so that things cannot access it. Uh, I think there's only one thrasher that I found in here that nests on the ground, and I think it might be the sage thrasher, but I digress. The diet, they are a classic example of the raking feeding style. They will sit there on the leaf litter, usually like oak duff or any of the other chaparral plants like laurel sumac or sugarbush or ceanothus is another small leaf litter creating plant. And they're just sitting there looking for bugs. They will shuffle that leaf litter around until they see something moving around, use that beak to pluck it up, and there you have it. A nourished California thrasher. Some of the prey items that feature here are beetles, spiders, Jerusalem crickets, and soft fruits too, because they're not restricted to insects only. Jerusalem crickets are a whole nother story that I won't get into now, but their taxonomy is not finally resolved in Los Angeles. Okay, so you guys have all heard California thrashers sing. They are in our area most like the mockingbird because they're closely related in terms of its song, but they're pretty similar to the other thrashers, but they do have kind of a more staccato or broken up sort of quality to their song. And these guys love to mimic. Um, they will make some pretty convincing imitations of other species. Now, I remember hearing maybe anecdotally at one point that the mimicking in the songs of mimid birds uh, functions maybe in the same way that visual displays do in other birds. The bird is signaling to a potential partner that, look, I'm so worldly that I've encountered all these other different species, and I'm so vital that I can, take it upon myself to reproduce those sounds in a convincing way. So it's maybe an indirect indicator of the quality of the habitat that the bird has access to, that it has all these other species it's encountering, and also its individual, health, that it is able to replicate the sounds, to a satisfying degree to the female. Okay. And their calls are, that kind of harsh, like sometimes I might confuse it with like a Western tanager call, but that's more of a double perlick, but sort of same tone. I'll play the California Thrasher just for posterity because who doesn't want to hear a California Thrasher? Anything from Lance up here? Lance is often in the Macaulay and Zeno Canto recording. Shout out to Lance. Okay. See, it's kind of rapid fire with double phrasing. It's like was that a hummingbird maybe mimic? And you can see it in the sonograms too. You can see that the notes are these discrete blocks in the sonogram. They're not like the other thrashers that we've seen that kind of like roll together, even just visually when you're looking at the sonogram. Okay. Thank you, California Thrasher. All right. Just to look at their local distribution, no surprise, they're all over the place. Check out how they are closely tied to the intact habitat. Um, Unlike something like a scrub jay, you guys probably all know they're not going to be like eating macaroni and cheese out of your bowl on the corner of a restaurant or something. They're not. I guess that's more of a suburban thing, not a restaurant thing. I have seen Western scrub jays eat macaroni and cheese, but they are tied to intact habitat. They don't really venture into urban areas as much. I guess now that I think about it, the same could be said for the scrub jay, but they're certainly not like a human commensal species. And here you have their phenology on the left here. Okay. Lacan's Thrasher, I think this might be one of my new favorites as I go through these. I got a chance to see them at Kelso Dunes, and they made a real impression on me. Um, they are inhabitants of like real sandy dune kind of environments. Not even just like, you're out in the desert and there's creosote around. This is like the substrate has to be really fine, really sandy. Um, for whatever reason, that's tied to the plants that they use. They also hang out with the Atriplex, the saltbush, just like that other species. I forget which one that was, but they also like to be associated with the Cholla as well. Uh, they, I think that, and I don't have any actual evidence to back this up. I'm sure something would bear it out, but it seems to me that their pale coloration, that's way paler than their closest relative, the crystal thrasher, is an adaptation to camouflaging in these sandy environments. They are, look at all these pictures. It's not a coincidence that they're all standing around in like pale, light colored sand. And I bet you that has a lot to do with the reason why they are so much paler than their closest relatives. Um, their distribution is super closely tied to the deserts. This range here is not it's not even getting into the more arid environments that are not truly, sandy dune kind of wash desert environments. So you'll see them in the Mojave Desert a lot. And as for their identification, like I said, the sandy color is the best thing to key into. They have faint little leftover facial patterning from their common ancestor that they shared with the crystal thrasher. Um, and they have kind of this peachy orangish color to their chrism, the undertail coverts, and they have a pretty long and decurved bill. Like most of the other thrashers, they are sedentary. They don't move around seasonally, and they breed from February to June, and they lay these nice blue eggs up there. Like the other thrashers, they lay their eggs. They're cup shaped. They build their cup shaped nest deep in some desert shrub. But in reading about the nests of these birds, it's probably true of all the other ones too, but I might as well highlight it here that there's a method to the madness in building the nest. It's probably true of a lot of birds, but they will start with large sticks on the outside of the nest, and then as they go in towards the center, the building material gets finer. So the sticks that are closer to the center of the nest are smaller, and in the very center you have, in this case, it's a human what is that, like old cloth? It's a human resource that they're using, but something fine and downy to cushion the eggs and be a nice little spot for their chicks to hatch into. Um, they also have kind of a specific feeding style. They don't just sift through the leaf litter. They'll actually dig little pits and look for invertebrates that way. And studies have shown that large part of their diet is made up of darkling beetles, ants, grasshoppers, weevils, moths, scorpions, spiders, small seeds, and for a special highlight, reptiles. Lizards like this unfortunate, probably sagebrush lizard that became dinner for this cute little family of Lacan's thrashers. But lizards, small snakes, and they'll even eat other bird eggs too. So um, I'm sure a lot of the other thrashers occasionally will do this too. They all have the equipment for it. But this was the only one that I found kind of real documentation for them doing that, which is this nice little set of pictures. Now, as for the photo credits here, I've kind of just copped out and put Macaulay Library. But if you see a photo that you took featured in this and I didn't put your name, um, don't hesitate to contact me. Or if you want to know who took a certain photo, I can provide that information too. I want to make sure that everyone is getting their photo credit here, but I did get them all from Macaulay Library. So I don't know who took this series of photos anymore, but you can see they are just going to town on this poor little lizard. This picture right here is especially, I don't know, it's got a real character to it. Um, so those beaks that are good for digging in leaf litter are just as good for harpooning lizards. Okay. Uh, the most interesting thing I could come up with about their song is that they have extended phrases. They kind of go on. They still have breaks between the phrases, but they're longer than the breaks in, say, the California Thrasher song. So it's not quite so you can even see it in the sonogram here. Remember the California Thrasher had like distinct peaks that were in quick succession. These guys have longer vocalizations, but then they have pauses in between like that. And their call is a whistled note that it goes like it's rising in pitch towards the end, unlike the call of the California Thrasher. So let's all take a listen. Okay. I'm gonna try and find the sonogram that I picked, but a little reminiscent of a mockingbird. But see, it's not as staccato as the California Thrasher, and the phrases tend to go on a little bit longer between the pauses. That rolling part of the song too, like that's something that I tend to associate with mockingbirds, northern mockingbirds, but it does show up in these guys too, and in the sage thrasher. Uh, but you'll hear the sage thrasher's song in a bit. It's different from the other thrashers, I think, enough that you can say, okay, well, this is a unique flavor to the sound that it has. All right. So here is their distribution and their phenology again. Um, again, they're not really in the LA basin. They are in the desert environments. It's got to be sandy. That's all I can say. There's not much more to it than that. I don't know what's going on over here in Los Padres area, actually. I have to do some digging into that. Maybe there are some alluvial fans and washy, sandy areas that they're finding there too. But they make it all over the desert. You know, once you really start thinking about the deserts as geographical boundaries, a lot of distributions start to make a lot more sense. Rather than, the state lines per se. The Mojave Desert is this great big entity that goes over a couple different states. And so is the Sonoran Desert, and so is the Great Basin Desert. But they are all unique uh, biomes, unique, community areas of living things that are share more in common with each other than they do with things outside of that. And so you get, it makes sense. There's a logic to each of those habitats that's consistent within it and across it. Okay, Bristle Thrasher. Oh, we got a message in the chat. Let's see what that says. To the west, near Maricopa and Taft, there's an outlying patch of desert. Wow, I learned something new. Thank you, Lance. I am going to go investigate. This was about LeConte near the south end of the Central Valley. Yes, thank you. That is very cool. I did not know that, so I will check it out. I'm sure there's some other cool disjunct desert population organisms that are going on over there. Okay, the crystal thrasher is also, big surprise, a desert bird. But it's more of an eastern desert bird than are the other ones that we've looked at so far. So despite looking like the California thrasher, it doesn't exactly share much overlap in its range. But I did see at least one report of a California and crystal thrasher hybrid. So clearly they are encountering each other out there. But for the most part, they have disjunct ranges, and they, unlike some of the other desert thrashers, the crystal thrasher um, does not live in the lowlands of the desert. It doesn't live in the really hot, baking ground of the desert. They like areas that are a little bit higher elevation. So they have, more of a plant community. They have larger plants. They have, small trees, maybe even big trees. And there's a lot denser vegetation in those kinds of areas. And so you get them in riparian brush, in arroyos, which are just little, ditches, desert washes, kind of the same thing. And they tend to be in association with some of these big name plants like desert almond and mesquite, the catclaw acacia, the desert willow, the oaks, which are not desert exclusives, but they are, in the fringes. So the desert is like, typically the Southern Californian deserts are low elevation, and the areas that rise up around them have different plant communities. So it's like, the shore on a beach or the rim of a bowl. It's a different elevation. You get different things surrounding that area in the middle. And again, saltbush atriplex. And occasionally, because animals, especially birds, can do whatever they want and move around wherever they want, they are sometimes found in the chaparral that's bordering the scrubland that they tend to prefer sometimes too. Okay, so for field marks on these guys, like I said earlier, the orange iris is a good thing to look at to set them apart from the California thrasher. They don't always have a totally orange. It's just light colored. Like this guy on the bottom here has a paler one. Maybe that has something to do with age. I know that some birds change the color of their eyes as they get older and develop. I don't know if that's the case with these birds. They have that. Look at this guy right here. He's got really like rich brick colored chrism there. It's to me, it's more saturated and it stands out more against the rest of the body than that of the California thrasher. So, that's what it's named after, and I think that's a good thing to hang your hat on when you're, trying to look for differences here. And look at that border of the malar stripe. I was remiss in not including a side by side of the two here, but if you remember the California thrasher, that dark part on the California thrasher tends to be up here. And this is just pure white underneath or light beige or whatever. But the crystal thrasher has that stripe underneath the malar stripe there. What would you call that? A submustachial stripe? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what that's called. And the mustachial stripe is the one above the malar. The malar is coming off of that little corner of the mouth right there. But that's almost always white in the thrashers, or at least paler than the surrounding facial pattern. But it gives them this contrasting look where like the white of their throat is bordered by this dark stripe going around the edge of it there. Um, just like the California thrasher and the LeContes, they have that long decurved bill like that. They are sedentary. They do not move around seasonally, to the extent of my knowledge. They breed from January to August, and oh, what a surprise! They build cup-shaped nests inside of dense desert shrubs. Uh, the species account for the crystal thrasher did note that they tend to build their nests in shady environments, but I'm guessing the other ones like some shade for their eggs too. Um, their diet is pretty similar to the rest of the thrashers. They obtain their food in the same way as the long sickle-billed thrashers. And we've got beetles, ants, crickets, grasshoppers, caterpillars, fly larvae, maggots, and they like juniper and other kinds of berries too. So if you like that sort of thing, there's lots of food for you in the desert. Desert. Okay. Uh, their song is similar to the California Thrasher, and this is the one that I was thinking of earlier that has less mimicry. It did say that in the species account, so I can say that I can pass that on to you without thinking that it's just my bias. But let's listen to it. Chrysal Thrasher. Okay, let's try the first one. Let's get a sense of some more variation here. Let's try this guy. It's always the faintest recordings here. Okay, so similar in quality and tone to the California Thrasher, maybe again a little bit more drawn out and fluid, but and with not as much mimicry. If anyone has objections, if you think that this does not sound anything like a California Thrasher, you're welcome to let me know. Oh, it looks like we got a message right here. LeConte again, they also occur in the Carrizo Plain to the west of Maricopa and Taft. Oh, very cool. I went to the Carrizo Plain a couple years ago and saw some very cool wildflower blooms, so I'm gonna go back there and look for conch thrashers. I was probably talking over that recording, so man, I cannot hear this even playing it myself here. Let's try this one. Okay, so good example of how variable these song repertoires can be. This one sounds a lot different from the California Thrasher. So I would encourage you all to go and pour through the recordings and kind of build your own picture of the differences between these songs. There's only so much that I can do to convey that, I think, short of you going and listening to it. And I think the sonograms are a helpful tool again. Now, I wish I had included a side-by-side comparison of them, but you can pause and screenshot this recording and compare them yourself, or just open multiple tabs on Macaulay Library. All right, let's go back to the visuals. Okay. Same deal here, desert distribution, but you can imagine that these points are all at a little bit of a raised elevation and kind of different plant communities than, say, the LeConte was living in before. And here's their phenology over here. January to August is their breeding season. And they do not have anything noted for migration. Okay, we are rounding up on our last bird in this species account section, and this is the sage thrasher, which is not a thrasher at all. I don't mean to be hating on the sage thrasher. They're beautiful birds, but they're not thrashers. Everything about them is mockingbird-like. Um, I mean, just look at this. This is not a thrasher. This is a mockingbird with streaks. And perhaps I'm belaboring this point too much, but I think it's at least an interesting piece of hidden knowledge that perhaps if you were just going off of the assumption that you can trust common names in birds, which is a bad assumption, you might be wondering, you might be left mystified why this thrasher is so different from the other ones. Well, the answer is that it's not a thrasher. These guys, right, stop number one on the tour of things that are different about the sage thrasher. Look at this giant range here. They are not feeding in the same way as the other thrashers. They're not feeding in the same way as the thrashers. And so they can exploit a whole different, group of environments. They're distributed a lot more widely. They have seasonal movements. They breed up here and then they migrate down here to spend the winter. They are a sagebrush near obligate species. Uh, you know, this guy is clearly sitting in a tree and not a sagebrush, but they, for the most part, spend most of their time in and around the sagebrush. They'll nest in it. They will, use it to have a vantage point from which to, watch out and look for, food items. And they spend most of their time foraging on the ground. In fact, almost exclusively, as you'll see, they feed on the ground. So this range that you're seeing here is tracing the extent of that great sagebrush sea, or the sagebrush steppe that is spread all over the Great Basin, or the Basin and Range Province, which if you're into geology, there's a really cool story that goes with that. Um, so Occasionally they do make it into pinyon juniper woodland too, but they're for the most part they're around the sagebrush, which is why they're called sage thrasher, sage mockingbird. Okay, so right away, looking at them, they've got really dark, contrasting streaks. Sometimes the streaks are a little bit faded, but you can use other context clues to tell you that this is a sage thrasher. They have this kind of orangish tint to their auricular feathers here. Gives them kind of like an eared look, and they have those great big piercing yellow eyes. And clearly, this is this is a mockingbird beak. It's not a thrasher beak. It is short. It is stubby. It looks like you painted a northern mockingbird in different colors because essentially that's what that is. It's got a pale gray back and not much of a curve to that bill. And look at that nest. It looks almost identical to the other ones we've seen so far. And the difference here is that they build it in sagebrush. And occasionally they'll build it on the ground too, but under a sagebrush. They breed from April to August. They're short distance migrants, like I said. And also, as I mentioned, they feed almost entirely on the ground. They will go after those big Pogonomyrmex harvester ants, the ones that build like what look like little volcanoes with seeds around the side piled up. Um, they'll go for crickets. They'll eat wild grapes. I was reading that there's one account of someone watching a sage thrasher pop open a grape and peel it. Sophisticated taste, I guess. I got a chat here. Sage thrasher. The tree is a juniper, and junipers grow in sagebrush areas, so the picture is not abnormal. Oh, I didn't mean to say that the picture was abnormal. I meant that to put a caveat on my saying that they're sage obligates. So Ken, you're totally right that yes, juniper is another one of the species that grows in close association with sagebrush, and they will absolutely, go and perch on a juniper and spend time in there too. Um, so yes, good observation. It is not abnormal that this guy is perched in a juniper at all. Um, so there you have it. Here are some nice little pictures of them eating different kinds of invertebrates. Down here, there's some kind of centipede. Up here, it looks like an earwig. That's, I don't know what that is. And this, I have no clue what that is either, but it looks creepy and it looks crawly, so it must taste good to a sage thrasher. Maybe that's a caterpillar of some kind, of a moth. This looks like maybe a bee or a beetle or a wasp. I don't know. Half of it is inside of that bird's mouth. But I always think it's worth the curiosity to look at what the birds are eating because, excuse me, those arthropods that are getting munched in these pictures are species in their own right too. I mean, I could have just as easily been doing a webinar about centipedes and I would have featured the great big bad sage thrasher, but here they're appetizers. Okay, all right, here's the kicker because when you hear this song, you will understand that this is a mockingbird. I got that. What is that, a meadowlark? Or am
I
I
think
crazy and that's a
I,
sage thrasher? Am I
no,
wrong?
I think they confused. They put this in the wrong category.
Yeah, okay. All right, I'm not crazy.
Mhm.
Okay, this is more like it. There was one recording that I found. Diego, keep track of the recordings that you find challenge. Impossible. Okay, so this is kind of like, a warbly song that is not so mockingbird-like, but I swear there was one that was just totally a dead ringer for a mockingbird. Here we go. See, do you hear what I'm talking about a little bit? Something about that is just a lot more mockingbird-like than the other ones. And it might have been the recording on the Sibley app that I listened to, and that's why I'm not finding it here. But their calls are also totally like mockingbird calls. I wish that I could play it just straight off of my Sibley app, but let's see if they have a call here. That does sound like a California Thrasher call. Okay. If you listen to the recording of this bird on the Sibley app, I'm almost certain that that's what you'll hear is the mockingbird-like one. So there is a little bit of a difference, but my point still stands, which is that genetically they're a lot closer to mockingbirds than they are to the other thrashers. Um, you could kind of hear it in that song, and there are some recordings where it's a lot more obvious than others. But I don't think I'm incorrect in saying that that's the case, as for the quality of the song. But there are some other features that they have, and I don't have a visual for this, but if you do go on the Birds of the World website, it does discuss the fact that they have wing raising displays, just like the other mockingbirds, and they don't have quite as big wing patches. They have a little bit of pale underneath the wings, but they will raise them up just like a northern mockingbird would, and that's part of their display that is not shared with the other with the thrashers. Um, they the Thrashers themselves have their own set of displays that are used for courtship or in antagonistic situations. Oftentimes they'll dip their head low to the ground and they'll raise their wings like that. At least that's the idea that I got from reading the descriptions of it. But the Sage Thrasher, so it seems they have the same kind of wing raising display that the other mockingbirds have. So again, these are all characteristics that are not coincidentally concentrated in the sage thrasher. They are homologous. They are inherited from a single common ancestor in the sage thrasher and the rest of the mockingbirds, which it is, a part of that group. So this iNaturalist map, I had to double check it when I looked at it because it showed all these reports over here in the basin. And sure enough, eBird had the same thing on it that said that, there are isolated reports. So maybe a more experienced birder than I am could tell me, in what circumstances sage thrashers make it over the mountains and they appear in our area here. I've never seen one in Los Angeles proper, like the city area or any of the foothills. But they are, this is like not their core range at all. It's on the outskirts, and it's, like I said, it's the sagebrush that they are really closely tied to. So anywhere you have sagebrush is, viable habitat. And so the Mojave Desert is not sage steppe. It's desert. And so you have little fringes, isolated populations, and instances where they're being seen in these places. But in our local area, this is what their distribution looks like. And uh, again, it's a shadow of what that main core range is like. Okay, which brings us back to this key. Hopefully, you know, you can use this as a resource going forward. I don't know. I guess you guys will have to tell me if this is something that you find useful. I'm sure that there are other tools like field guides that are going to give you a more specific and tailored look at the birds that are in your region, wherever you might be when you need to identify a species. But in terms of the whole genus overall, and also the sage thrasher, I hope that this is kind of a, at least a good primer for sorting the being able to more effectively put a name to the face with the thrashers. And you can pair it with that phylogeny that was at the beginning to get, again, these two complementary and overlapping frameworks for understanding the diversity that you see within and among these species. With that, we're back to our quiz time. So this is a bird that we talked about, like all the birds that'll be on the quiz. And same as the beginning, maybe you guys want to put the answers in the chat if you
Yeah,
want.
just pop them in the chat. And I'm sure a lot of people see what kind of bird this is. Oh, well, or maybe not.
Maybe not. Perhaps you can
Ah, there we go.
I don't want to reveal it, but I do want to go back. Uh I cannot go back to the you know what I can do is um do it off screen here so that you see. I can go back to that key and maybe you guys want to like screenshot or do something like that. Hopefully my hope is that you could use this as a resource to identify the thrashers when you're presented with them too. So let me
And
go.
a reminder, this is being recorded, so people
Yes,
will
yes.
be able
I
to
just mean like in the
screenshot.
here and now, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a wonderful key. I love this.
Thank you. Okay, maybe you want to take a picture of it with your phone or something like that and use it to answer the questions in the quiz afterwards. It's a cheat sheet. It's got all the answers right there.
Yep.
Okay, back to our bird. I saw we had some answers coming in.
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
All
yes.
right.
Our respondees, respondents, I don't know what is a real word out of those three, but we're correct. It is a Bendier's thrasher. It is faintly streaked on the bottom. It does not have a super long curved bill, and it is pale grayish brown on the back there. So that should be enough to take you to this species. All right, how about this guy? Surya, right out of the gate. Ha ha ha, Mary. Yes, a mockingbird. Well, maybe a mockingbird. George says sage. Yes, this is a sage thrasher or a sage mockingbird. We were correct. Okay, which one's the Californian? Which one's the Chrysal?
Oh, excellent.
Left or right? Surya has his answer in and says left Chrysal. Right California. Right, Chris. Left Chrysal. Okay, remember the eyeball trick, everybody. Which one of these two species has the pale iris? It's on the key. Which one of them has a darker color on their chrism that they are named after? And which one has the dark stripe bordering the white feathers of their throat underneath the malar stripe?
Mhm.
Okay, so we've got a lot of answers in, and it looks like we have some confusion. The left bird is the California thrasher, and the right bird is the crystal thrasher. So we did have some answers that said that the left one was the crystal thrasher. I'd be curious to know uh, which field marks you were basing that guess off of.
Well, so Diego, run through the field marks again for us,
So
right?
the field marks are first and foremost the color of the iris, the white or the light colored eye here in the crystal thrasher versus the darker iris in the California thrasher. The saturation or intensity of this color underneath the tail here. In the California thrasher on the left, it's a little bit paler and more of an orange color, whereas on the right, it's darker. And sure, there is a little bit of element of the lighting there, but it's darker on the right and more of a saturated red color. And then finally, if you look at the malar stripe, which is this white stripe going here on the California here on the left and the crystal on the right, on the crystal, underneath that malar stripe is this black stripe right here, or this dark brown stripe. And on the California thrasher, you have very faint, if any, of that going on there. It's like a big white throat coming right up to the border of that malar stripe. So those would be the marks that I use to distinguish them. Um, and that's certainly no problem. We're not all going to get it on the first try,
Yeah.
but going forward, that's food for thought. So very good job, everyone. California
Excellent.
Thrasher and Crystal Thrasher. Okay, and how about this guy?
Hmm.
Sirius's curve build. Lily says curve build.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other guesses? Well, this bird is kind of a tricky one. I purposely picked a kind of a dark, a poorly, I mean, not to throw shade on this photographer, but maybe a darker, more shadowy picture of this bird. This is a Bendier's thrasher.
Hmm.
Um, it has a shorter beak than the curve-billed thrasher, which has a longer decurved beak. But you guys are yes, Mary got it right. Looks like another Bendier's. Mary Allen, good guess, gray, but I didn't throw any of the ones that we didn't cover here. But that was a good guess because it does kind of look like a gray thrasher in this picture. But it has a shorter beak than the curve-billed thrasher. Other than that, that was kind of the only thing that you might be able to really solidly get from this picture. Everything else about it is kind of variable within the range of variation for the curve build and the Bendier's thrasher. So clearly, if you were seeing this bird out in the field, you would have a lot more context clues. You could look at the range, and you could look at the habitat type. The curve build thrashers, they they do spend time on the ground, but most of the time they're in or around those spiny cactus plants. Um, Obviously, when they feed, they're on the ground. But this guy, yes, is a Bendier's thrasher. I got him right off of Macaulay. Okay, and finally, who's this? Maybe a good point of comparison in beak shape between these two species. He's got a much more curved bill. Yes, he's a curved-billed thrasher.
Yeah.
Well, with that, that's the end of my presentation. Uh,
Excellent. Excellent.
so I am happy to answer any questions.
Please pop your questions in the Q&A section.
Other
So we
than
have
that,
time
thank
to
you guys for the
interact.
time and for listening.
Yeah, I think a lot of them came up in the chat during the presentation. Oops. Oh, thank you.
I just have one question for you, Diego. You were talking about Crystal being the sort of under tail feathers. Made me think about the Latin name, the toxostoma, which is something like toxic mouth, I'm guessing.
No, toxo means I think it means like thick or something, because there's a genus of extinct mammal called Toxodon, and it's
Oh,
the same
sure,
root
right.
word. It's like it's got like big molars or something. I could be wrong. It might be like narrow, but stoma is mouth, so
Mouth, right.
uh, it's not toxic in the same way as it is. Um, on my old laptop, which is sitting right in front of me, but the battery has long since died and is not recoverable. I had a PDF copy of the Helms Dictionary of Scientific Dictionary of Bird Names, and it had every single one of those Latin roots enumerated on there, and it listed all of the meanings. So I'll have to go and find that again.
All right,
Um,
fun.
Diego, could you pop the key up once again?
Yes, I can pop the key up.
And for Anne and for everyone else, this presentation was recorded and will be up on our website in a few days. Up, almost there. Keep
There we go.
going. There you go. All right. Any other questions that anyone has?
There's a
And
question in the chat about centipedes. So regarding thrashers eating centipedes, are they immune to the stings from
I
rats?
have no idea whether they're doing like jujitsu to dodge the bites or the stings, or if they have an immunity built up to it. Um, I can only offer you pure speculation in that department. Um, beats
okay.
me. I don't know. I don't
Oh,
know anything about their physiology in terms of, anything that eats insects is going to be coming to term. I don't know what the phrase I'm looking for is, but it's going to have to be dealing with a lot of nasty compounds because insects love to sequester like nasty secondary metabolites from plants that they eat and make themselves disgusting and
hmm.
poisonous in various ways. So I would guess that they probably, just over, millions of years of natural selection, the ones that, got diarrhea and died never had eggs. So the ones that are immune to it, they passed on those genes.
Yeah.
But that's just my educated guess. Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Charlene, and Mary Ellen, and Marshall, and everybody.
Yes, and thank you, Diego. This was a wonderful, as Lance said, a tour de force, and I agree totally. Um, there's
Oh,
there's lots of great. Go ahead.
I'm
Who
sorry to
said tour de
interrupt you.
force? Oh
I
yeah,
just
thank
looked
you.
up Dago. I looked up what toxo means, and it means bow, like a bow.
Oh,
Oh, bowed. Okay, that's a
Yeah.
good. I mean,
So bow
tells you
mouth.
right
That
there.
makes
That's it.
sense.
Cool.
excellent, excellent. Well, it's everyone has lasted almost 2 hours with us, and Diego, thank you very much for a wonderful in-depth presentation.
Thank you
Uh,
guys. This was a blast. You gave me an excuse to, justify sitting and making all these things and reading about thrashers for like hours. So I appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate it also, really. Please, everyone, join us for our next webinar with on the California Bird Atlas on November 4th. And until then, we will see you all. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next time. And
Thanks,
thanks
Dago.
again, Diego.
Thank you guys. Good night.
Good night, everyone.